I was geographically the most isolated life form on the entire planet to complete the world's first coast-to-coast ski crossing of Antarctica, dragging those two sleds that initially weighed 420 pounds for 1,750 miles over 115 days completely alone.
Welcome to the Vitalist Podcast, where healing meets wonder. This is your space to gain transformative knowledge, deepen your mind-body connection, and awaken your human spirit. If you're ready to connect with your innate potential, embrace life's challenges, and expand what you believe is possible, this is the place. Get ready to slow down, be moved, and live like a true vitalist. Today on The Vitalist, we're joined with Akshay Nanavati, a man who has walked the edge of life and returned with a map for the rest of us. A Marine Corps veteran who's transmuted the darkness of PTSD, depression, and addiction into a deep well of purpose. He's built a global movement rooted in courage and consciousness, run ultra marathons across unforgiving terrain, and spent 60 days alone in Antarctica, dragging a 420-pound sled for 500 miles on what experts call one of the boldest expeditions of our time. His book, Fearvana, endorsed by the Dalai Lama, is a bridge between neuroscience, spirituality, and the embodied wisdom born of suffering. Akshay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to start with Fearvana, this book. And you actually mentioned this book to me 3 years ago when we first met. And I didn't read it in the first year. I didn't read it the second year, but I did read it in the third year. And maybe it's a timing thing. But tell us, people have a conception of what fear is, and most people are adverse to fear. We don't move towards it. How did you coin the term Fearvana, and tell me about Fearvana?
The fundamental ethos is to combat that demonization of fear as something bad. It was born from my own struggles with fear, with stress, with anxiety. When I was a kid, I was scared of everything, from Ferris wheels to not roller coasters, but even Ferris wheels. Like, everything scared me. Open water, tight spaces, all of it. And joining the Marines changed my entire life. I had moved to the U.S. at about 13, got into drugs, alcohol. Watching the movie Black Hawk Down set the stage for me to get off drugs and into the Marines. Just watching these people sacrificing their lives for another human being and the courage that it takes to do that. I was living this completely selfish, worthless existence at the time. And so I got off drugs, joined the Marines, and Marine Corps training was hard. And that birthed in me everything I am today and everything that has now become Fearvana, because it taught me not only the beauty of suffering, but the beauty of going to war with the self to find something in the human spirit to transcend our struggle. Everything about boot camp was hard. There was a lot of stress, a lot of fear. They constantly make sure you have that plenty, feeling it throughout boot camp. But I found something in myself to transcend that. And not just for myself, but for the good of the group. My men and my mission mattered more than my well-being. And that's beautiful to live in a world like that, where it's the good of the group. And so after the Marine Corps boot camp, I systematically started confronting all my fears. I went rock climbing, mountain climbing, cave diving, skydiving, scuba diving, like you kind of name it. The outdoors became my playground to explore each one of my fears. And after I was deployed to Iraq, I struggled a lot after the war, diagnosed with PTSD, depression, drinking, was on the verge of suicide. One morning after 5 days of binge drinking, was seconds away from splitting my wrists. And climbing out of that abyss led to the book Fearvana and the ethos of it. Because I started to realize that the fundamental problem in the human experience is our demonization of these so-called negative emotions, fear, stress, anxiety, things that we label as bad, but they're very much a normal part of the human experience. We all go through them. You can't have courage without fear. Everything worthwhile I have done in my life, from building a business to writing a book to getting married to all these crazy adventures that I go on, they're terrifying. But that's why I do them. Greatness is on the other side of that fear. And if you can't have courage without fear, and courage is one of the most vital virtues in life, why do we demonize this thing that is the very access point to our greatness? So I wrote Fearvana to help others reframe how they view stress, fear, and ultimately what it is this realization that fear is not the antithesis of nirvana, it's an access point to it. We believe that these two seemingly contradictory ideas are in fact contradictory when they are complementary, and they both can and must coexist. So the book is designed to help people reframe their relationship to fear so they can use it to access greater levels of peace, bliss, and even enlightenment.
Do you find that there are types of fear? Like, there's selected fear, like you entered the Marines, you chose to go to war. You know, there's things that you selected. What about the fear that we don't select, that we don't choose, that comes into our life?
I think that there are going to be, they've done a lot of studies on this too. There's some fears, for example, some people will be from a young age scared of snakes. Some people will be scared of tight spaces. Other people will be scared of open spaces. Evolutionary speaking, you can look at these, and every one of these fears has value. Snakes could kill you. Tight spaces could kill you. Even open spaces could kill you. In a wide open plain in the Serengeti, right? A lion could come and kill you. So all the rooted fears we have, they have an evolutionary value. In my perspective, I feel like going deep into understanding why it's there is somewhat a moot point. It's kind of like, who cares? It's there. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And that's why I don't even like the term irrational fear, because irrational fear, once again, is ascribing a judgment around the fear. It's there for a reason. Instead of deeming it irrational, it's like saying the lung is irrational. It's not. It just does what it does. We have consciousness to rise above our fear, to choose beyond them. So it's a very powerful weapon for others to use and make you do things. We see that in our world today. People weaponize the fear of others. But the way to not be a slave to that fear and to be ultimately a slave to others who use it to control you is to acknowledge it, to understand it, to accept its presence, and then decide in the face of it. Like people, I did a talk once and somebody was like, I'm really scared of cats. What do I do? How do I get over it? And I'm like, do you care? Does it affect your life? They're like, no. Awesome. Then who cares?
Move on.
Exactly. I mean, I'm still to this day get creeped out by spiders. I don't really care, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But for example, there was a time where I found it valuable to confront my fears. I mentioned, right? Scared of heights, so I went rock climbing. Scared of open water, so I went scuba diving. And that built in me confidence. So sometimes the outcome you are seeking can be confidence itself, so you engage fears as a mechanism to train the muscle of courage. But ultimately, you want to start with, what's the outcome I'm seeking? What am I oriented towards? And work backwards from there. Now I have immense knowledge and confidence in my abilities to exercise the muscle of courage when I need it, that I choose it in consciously directed ways. So I don't care if spiders creep me out. I'm going to choose courage in other ways that are more valuable because I've built that muscle through exercising it other means. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Tell me how you've built that muscle. Was it just engaging in things that you used to be afraid of?
It's systematically engaging it. I mean, I didn't get to the point of doing 60 days alone in Antarctica overnight, right? I mean, as an example, how extreme I went. When I struggled with drinking, I didn't have a problem being in a room with people drinking. I could be in a room with 100 people drinking, have zero desire to drink. It was when I was alone that my demons would rise, and I would do everything I could to escape it. Drinking was my primary mechanism to escape being with myself. So I went from the inability to be alone at that level to, in the last 2 years, spending 117 days as alone as a human being could be. In Antarctica, I was geographically the most isolated life form on the entire planet for portions of the journey. So that doesn't just happen overnight. You build that muscle, even with heights, with open spaces. I remember when I was a kid, my parents took me to Australia, and we were snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef, and I was snorkeling, and I saw the reef just drop off into the black nothingness of the ocean, and I was too scared, so I turned around. And then I went scuba diving, and now I've been cave diving, which is scuba diving into dark caves. But the point is, you can build that up systematically. Do things that are slightly scary. You're not going to go from zero to climbing Everest overnight. Do small things that are scary. Even if you're scared of talking to strangers, the next time you walk into a Starbucks, talk to the barista, make her or him smile, whatever, right? Like, do little things to start building that muscle. In fact, even getting together with my wife heard on a podcast before we got together, this is true, I said on a podcast that I'm more scared of asking a woman out than I am of going to war. And so she heard this, and apparently I was terrible at reading the signal she was giving me, so she's like, she asked me out, and we went out. But even that was scary. I was terrified going on that date with her. I was so scared. But now I've developed a muscle to face it and to be with it, to move through it, however it shows up. So that comes with training and practice.
Do you find that it's more the physicality of fear, like moving your body towards something? Or is it more like what you said, you can sit with something and feel out the fear, understand why it's there, and go underneath the fear, so to speak? What part, or is it both of that? Like, you do both?
I think it's a bit of both. Depending on where you are in your journey and your relationship to fear, Sometimes movement is just a really powerful mechanism. You can jump, you can listen to music, you can charge yourself up, you can, punch your fist in the air, whatever you need to do. You can use physicality to transform that experience within you physiologically. And there's tons of research on this, right? How our body can change our psychology and vice versa, right? So you can use the physiology of it to move through whatever the moment may be. Whatever the fear that you're engaging. Other times it could be just pausing, noticing it mentally, sitting with it, being still with it, and then choosing to create the space between the emotion and you as the feeler of that emotion.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
So this is kind of the core of it. I think the core of mastery is creating space between what is and who you are outside of what is. I always like to say you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings, you're not your experiences. You are the thinker of your thoughts, the feeler of your feelings, and the experiencer of your experiences. In my book, Fearvana, I go into this concept, which I think is the key of it here. The Buddha said we are all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the one we don't control. That first dart that we don't control is not just external, it's internal as well. Right now, if somebody comes into this room with a gun, I'm going to feel fear. I'm not choosing it. Most of what what happens within us is a subconscious response to external stimuli that is beyond our control. And we demonize it. I should not feel this way. People will tell their kids, don't be scared, don't worry, don't be anxious. All you're saying is don't feel what you feel. This is the problem, because the second dart of suffering is what we do with that first dart. And all unnecessary suffering comes from that second dart. So instead of just accepting what is and being with it without judging it, without labeling it as good or bad, that's the second dart is when we say things like, I should not feel this way. I wish things were not this way. Why does God hate me? Whatever that self-dialogue, we can all relate to that spiral that we have in our head, right? I call that second dart syndrome. But the moment you accept what is, that's the key to freedom from all unnecessary suffering, is acceptance of isness. Acceptance of isness. And acceptance of isness, to reiterate this point, is not just accepting external stimuli, most of which is pretty much entirely beyond our control, right? We can see this in the world. There's a lot of things happening you may not agree with, but there's a lot you can't do about it. And from that place of acceptance, can you then recreate your reality as you choose? And I'm feeling the nerves, but I'm going to accept it. It's there. It's okay. Even while I was driving on this date with my wife, for example, I was pausing. Hey, I'm feeling fear. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to demonize it. I'm not going to beat myself up for feeling it. Got it. I'm just going to be with it. And neuroscience has even shown that when you label an emotion, it decreases activity in the emotional part of your brain, the limbic brain, and increases activity in your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain related to focus and awareness. So essentially, it's creating that space between the first dart and the second dart, which is our point of power.
Do you find that when you are feeling the fear, and I kind of mentioned you're talking to it. Okay, I accept that that's there.
Yeah.
Do you have this conversation with fear, or is it more your higher self that you're talking to?
A bit of both. So it's a conversation sometimes with the fear itself, and then other times it is like, who do I want to be on the face of it? And it also kind of depends on the craft that I'm choosing. So for example, skydiving. Once you leap off the plane, the fear's kind of gone.
Right.
So I remember the first few times I went skydiving, I'm super nervous in the plane, and then you jump and it's gone. So it's kind of this instant action that fights the fear. But other things that are more constant, whether it be writing a book, building a business, things like going to Antarctica, the fear is more ever present. Even writing a book on fear, for example, to your question about talking to the fear, I was like, all right, what am I scared of? Why am I scared? And what I would do is you can actually write this down. What am I scared of? Why am I scared? What's the worst case scenario? And that's not a bad place to go, because when you get clear on what the worst case scenario is, now you can prepare for it. One of my many mantras is fear propels you to prepare when you consciously engage it. So even writing the book, I was scared of writing a bad book. People would judge me. People would think it's stupid. I get a 1-star review on Amazon, all that stuff. So I was like, got it. I'm scared of writing a bad book. Let me study how do I write a good book. I studied from authors like Jack Canfield, Tim Ferriss, authors who've sold millions of books. As a result, I wrote a book that was worthy of being endorsed by the Dalai Lama. Even Antarctica, that fear was ever present. That's a really good thing. If you're not scared of what I just did, there's something wrong with you. You should be scared, So I would actually write down what are all the things that could go wrong in Antarctica. And I write down an extensive list. Astronauts call this negative visualization. It is hugely important to visualize the outcome you want. But if you're just doing that, especially if it's something big where the consequences are severe, And in Antarctica, the consequences are very severe. But even building a business, the consequences may not be life or death, but losing all your money is a pretty big consequence, right? So you write down, what am I scared of? What's the worst case scenario? Then you can prepare for it. In Antarctica, for example, there was an incident where I burnt a hole in my tent, and I had that listed as a potential problem, but I was prepared for it. So I sewed it up and all good. So because I was prepared, and fear is a useful mechanism, a very useful mechanism to prepare. And that's what talking to the fear does.
It sounds like you're almost neutralizing what could go wrong. What has fear taught you the most?
It is such a gift. I'm so grateful for it. It's taught me that it is the access point to everything I want in life. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasures you seek." If you want something new in life, you're going to have to do something you've never done before. Doing something you've never done before is going to be scary. And so you're going to need to exercise the muscle of courage in order to get that thing. And fear is the vehicle to get there. So now when I feel it, I couldn't be more grateful for it. I've developed such a positive relationship to it, to fear, to stress, to suffering, to anxiety, all of it.
Do you find that people, like when you work with people or coach people, is it they're more afraid of listing what could go wrong? They're more afraid of listing the worst case scenario and going into that because it might bring up some of their stuff?
I think initially they're just scared of fear itself. There's that quote, right? The only thing to fear is fear itself, which I think is actually very flawed. It's not to the thing to fear. And so like I worked for an example with one client who every time he would sit down to write on the computer, he would get anxiety. Anxiety, stress, and fear are essentially sisters. They're all kind of interconnected. And so he would get anxiety and have these physiological responses, sweaty palms, and he would ultimately retreat to go watch TV. And we got deeper into it. His self-dialogue was, I'm a piece of shit. I should not feel this way. What's wrong with me? And he kept beating himself up. Everybody else before me was trying to get rid of the anxiety. I was like, we're not going to do that. Right now, you don't actually have control over it. The brain has, in simplistic terms, the brain has created an association that says computer equals anxiety. So the next time this happens, just label it. I'm feeling anxiety. Just don't beat yourself up. And then I just want you to type for 30 seconds. 30 seconds becomes 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, so on and so forth. And you beat the mechanism. And then you change that first dart. The first dart was the anxiety he didn't control, but the second dart was the real problem. That's all unnecessary suffering is the second dart. So I think most people, in my experience, they beat themselves up. And as long as and it won't happen instantly because it's hard at first if you're very untrained in that muscle of self-awareness to even get clear on what is the first dart, the second dart. But the more you train yourself to just say, what is right now? And it's as simple as, okay, what is right now? I'm feeling fear. This thing is happening that I can't control. You just train yourself to be with that. And you can train this muscle constantly. You're going into Starbucks to get a cup of coffee. What am I feeling right now? You're just training that muscle to become aware of what is, so you build that space between the first and the second dart, and that's the key.
Yeah, I love that what is because you're helping them get into the body too, instead of staying up here and keeping the narrative going, right?
Exactly.
Okay, take me back to childhood because
Yeah.
I want to know the human being you are that we read about, we see on Instagram. We're like, what kind of childhood did this guy have? Because our wounds can serve us later. They make us want to do things. They help us become certain things. But adversity, what was childhood like?
I didn't experience any real adversity. I mean, I guess every child goes through some challenges, but I had great parents. They weren't extremely wealthy at the time, but middle class. We moved from India to Singapore to Austin, put me in great schools, had a great life. I didn't know suffering. When I came to Austin, the reason I got into drugs and alcohol at a pretty heavy level was I was just lost, moving to 4 cities in 3 countries over 12, 13 years. I had no sense of self-identity. I was very adaptable. That's why I made friends everywhere I moved, but every strength also has a shadow. So my adaptability comes with impressionability. So and I don't blame them today. I take responsibility for my behavior, but as a child, you're very impressionable. So I got into a group of friends where that was the thing we did. And so me being me, I think there was always some version of this guy who was always going to do the most extreme. I got into the hardest drugs first. I was pushing that edge. I mean, I still have scars on my arm here and here from cutting myself, burning myself. I was the crazy guy. That's what I guess I still am. But now, at least now I just doing it in a positive way, right? So, but drugs became my expression of pushing that edge. It was me and one other friend that first went from marijuana and alcohol to harder stuff. He ended up ODing and died. And so that was why I got into it. But it wasn't because I had any kind of traumatic childhood or any suffering. Of course, again, I struggled with each move, but that's minimal compared to any real challenge. It was the Marines that first introduced me to suffering.
Wow.
And
tell me about that. Like, what was so suffering about a Marine versus what you were going through with drugs and alcohol?
once I saw that movie Black Hawk Down, after watching it, I read the book Black Hawk Down and read every book I could find on military and life in combat. And just seeing there was this thing that intrigued me about an experience like war. It reveals humanity at its most extremes. The worst of humanity. People do horrific things to each other, but also the best. People will jump on grenades to save another. And there's an interesting dynamic about being in an environment that reveals humanity without all the masks we put on. And in the depths of suffering, you see the purity of humanity, for better or worse, without all those masks. And that's what drew me to it. It's not some sort of war junkie or anything like that. I sometimes have been called that. But it was more this, I guess, search for a deeper understanding of the human condition and the human experience. And in Marine Corps, when I enlisted, this was post 9/11. So I was almost certainly going to war. I also enlisted as an infantry Marine, so I was going to be on the front lines. It took me a year and a half to get in because I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. So I had to fight my way in. So I really tried hard to get in. And then in the training, especially post 9/11, now we're in a wartime environment, they push you hard, and the suffering there, the hardship. I wasn't very fit at the time. I had just come out of doing a lot of drugs, so I wasn't a very fit person, So I fell back on hikes, but mentally I loved the fight. Like my drill instructor, even when he met my parents at boot camp, he said he needs to work on his running, but he's a good Marine. So I mentally could handle it. I loved the environment of suffering for something greater. It wasn't about your own well-being. It was about the good of the group, and that mattered more than your individual well-being.
Tell me about this group dynamic. You mentioned when you're suffering with the group, it's different than when you're suffering alone.
Mm-hmm.
And you've suffered with the group. You went to war, right?
Yeah.
You've had a team. You have to work as a unit. But then you chose to do experiences and challenges that were in complete isolation.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
When you suffer with the group, there's an element that is both easier and harder. Easier in the sense that there's a responsibility that you have to your group, to your men, even separate from war. When I've been on group expeditions, even if I'm not the leader of the expedition, attitude is contagious. So it's your responsibility. In my opinion, everybody's a leader. Whether you're a high-ranking person or not, you're all a leader, and it is your responsibility to bring the highest version of yourself. Because if you don't, that is contagious, and other people around you will break. In war, I was a corporal, so I was a non-commissioned officer, so I was, in a very literal sense, a leader. They were younger junior Marines, and if I show weakness, what does that do to the younger Marines? So it forces you to become a better version of yourself. In that sense, I think it's easier because when you're completely alone, there's no one. You could just decide not to get out of your tent one day. You could be weak, and who cares? There's no one to rise to the occasion for. But at the same time, why it's harder is because there is now that responsibility. It's not just your life that's in your hands. In that sense, it's easier when you're alone. Like when on solo expeditions, I can move at my pace, whether that means slower than somebody else or faster than somebody else. I can do what I want, when I want it. The only responsibility I have is my own, not anybody else's. So in that sense, it is easier. And I've enjoyed the dynamic of both. Now, where I'm at, I probably wouldn't do group expeditions ever again. I thrive on in the solitude. And if I were to go back to Antarctica, I would go back on a solo expedition.
So let's get into some of the experiences you've had. You did Days in Darkness, 17 days total, just complete darkness, isolation. And then you chose to do the opposite in complete white, brightness, lightness, right? All alone in Antarctica. What did you experience as the main differences in both those environments?
The darkness was mentally more challenging in at times because of the boredom. In Antarctica, there was a mission. I had to cover distance. I was going somewhere. Overall, I'd say Antarctica was harder just because pulling that sled was brutal. Was the physicality of pulling that much weight we got some of the worst snow conditions in modern history. So when you're pulling that much weight through soft snow, I mean, there were days where every 3 steps, the sleds would get stuck in the snow. I'd fight them out. They'd get stuck again. And this just would go on and on and on for over 9 hours. So the mental toll of that and the physical toll, the body was in pain from day one of the expedition. Some flavor of pain was constant throughout. That was way more brutal. But in the darkness, there was boredom because there is no mission. There's just being. And that, confronting that, but that's part of the draw, that what drew me into the darkness. Because the first time I went in, I actually was working out in the first 2 days. And then I realized that I'm working out just to escape the stillness. Because working out, I'm comfortable with. I can do that all day. I love the physical fight. And I was like, you're just doing this to escape the stillness. So I sort of made a rule for myself, no more working out. First time it was 7 days, I went in and I just said, no more working out. You have to sit still with the silence. And that was a great teacher. The first time I went, and I also went in to heal. I had went through this very challenging divorce. My ex-wife got caught up in a cult, and I broke my sobriety. I didn't like that about myself, so I went in to heal. The second time I went in, the 10 days alone, was as training for Antarctica. So it was a very different mentality that drove me in. It was not healing the past. It was looking forward to the future and cultivating an identity as self, as training for the immense solitude I'd experience in Antarctica. So very different intentions that drove me, but the boredom was a constant that I had to face each time, and that was again part of the draw.
Tell me more about the boredom, because people don't find themselves bored. We're very stimulated.
Yeah.
We can distract ourselves easily just by picking up the phone.
We do everything to distract ourselves from ourselves.
So, like, how long did it take you to sit with the boredom and then for the mind just to go quiet and you just to accept the boredom?
My time in the darkness, other than sleeping, essentially was I was either journaling, because I actually journaled in the dark, so I'd have a ruler and kind of move down, or meditation, long meditations. And between those times of doing, there was just sometimes just sitting there like, oh shit, I don't know how many days I have left in this. What am I doing here? Kind of thing, And all of those moments are valuable. That's what the draw is, to sit still with yourself at that level. You're opening doors within yourself that are very rarely opened. That's the value. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And he also said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The darkness makes the unconscious conscious. But when you are sitting still with yourself at that level, what rises up is not just the sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. It's also your demons, your darkness. And you're opening doors within yourself where all that stuff comes out. And facing it is the value. Because now, once you make the unconscious conscious, you can use it. There's sometimes in your demons in the war, or in my demons in the war, but whatever demons we all have, we've all gone through struggle. Some of them you don't ever get over. You just learn to use. I was in Antarctica, and I still had moments crying, thinking about my buddies that I've lost in the war, buddies I've lost to suicide, addiction. Some of that I'll never get over, but I will learn to use. They become now mechanisms to drive me forward on a mission. So the value of the darkness was bringing all of that to the surface, to confront the boredom, to sit with the stillness. I truly believe it is the greatest human fear, is stillness. I don't think if you ask somebody what are they afraid of, almost nobody will say stillness. But if you look at the behaviors of humanity, and it's not even just the negative things we do, like binge watching Netflix or drinking, people who are entrepreneurs, they will do everything they will just keep working because they avoid themselves. People who work out, you will see this all the time. They will work out just to escape themselves. And I've done all of this too. That's what drove me into the darkness the first time. I recognized that I'd gotten really good at doing hard things. I'd built a business. I'd gotten so good at all that. And I was like, yeah, but you still haven't confronted myself. So stillness was the big fear to face. That's what drove me into there. So I think there's another quote that French philosopher Blaise Pascal, he said, all of humanity's problems stems from man's inability to sit by himself in a room alone. And I think that is extremely true. That is the value. You don't have to go to the edge of darkness sitting in a dark retreat. One kid who was so inspired by what I did, he just locked himself in a dark closet for an hour and just sat in a dark closet. I thought that was epic, But you train that muscle to build stillness, to get comfortable with yourself. It'll improve every area of your life. Every area.
Do you find that because you have sat with yourself at these levels of stillness and induced boredom to really figure out who you are, has anything surprised you?
We've seen right now there's this epidemic of loneliness. And most times when people look for the cures or how do we address this, where all they're saying is something to do with connection. Surround yourself with more people. But if you're using connection as a band-aid for solitude, you're not actually solving the problem. The true solution is getting more comfortable with yourself. When you can theoretically get to a point that you could sit by yourself in a room alone forever if you had to, and I'm not saying you should do that, but when mentally you know you could, your connections will improve in every area of your life. And that's what I've found. My life has become better in every way. I'm extremely comfortable with myself. As I mentioned, I used to be able to not be alone to the point that I would down liters of vodka when I was alone. And now not only do I love my alone time, I have greater connections with tribe, with friends. It improves how you connect with others because you're connected to yourself. It'll improve your relationship with your partner. You can't really have a great relationship with a partner as well until you have a great relationship with yourself. That's the most important relationship, the one you're going to be around 24/7. So it'll just radically improve every area of your life.
Okay, take me a little bit into Antarctica. This was your last big mission. Tell us about it. How did you experience it? And take me to the day where you had to say quits.
Yeah. So the mission was to complete the world's first coast-to-coast ski crossing of Antarctica, dragging those two sleds that initially weighed 420 pounds for 1,750 miles over 115 days completely alone. This had never even been attempted before, let alone completed. And many adventurers consider it to be impossible. People had told me anyone who attempts this will probably fail. I took 4 years, devoted my life directly to training for this. I'd done a lot of hard things before this, but directly for this. We had to raise $1.1 million from scratch, in addition to training like a beast and planning, preparing, logistics, nutrition, everything for this. And went out there, and I actually truly believe it is an impossible feat now, having attempted it. What ended up happening was very early on, it was excruciating from day one. I carried the heaviest sled any man's pulled from that coast of Antarctica, 420 pounds going uphill from day one. We also got hit with some of the worst snow conditions. So when you're hitting with soft snow, it was brutal. There were other adventurers attempting different kinds of records out there. Everyone failed. People doing trips that normally took 30 days were taking 40 days. The soft snow was just unforgiving, and dragging the heaviest sled made it hell. So it was about day 45 or day 48, it became very clear that the math wasn't there, that I could not complete the crossing. In the time I had left, there was just no way I could make that distance. So I kept fighting at that point just to see how far I could get and for the spiritual experience, because it is beautiful experiencing that level of solitude. And to paint a picture of what Antarctica is, because I've realized not a lot of people are familiar. I mean, even my own mom, first time she heard, she was like, so I can come meet you on the other end, right? And there'll be a hotel
At the
there.
finish line?
I'm like, Mom, I don't think you fully understand what Antarctica is. There's no hotels. This is not how it works. So, but it's flat white nothingness. For the first 30 days, I didn't see anything but literally flat white. So imagine staring at a white wall and just doing that every day for 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours a day. Day 31 was my first glimpse of a mountain in the distance that I had to go up, and it was unreal to experience being completely alone out there.
What did you feel in your body? Yeah. I mean, different than the darkness a little bit because you are moving towards something, but what was happening in your body? Like, did you notice different sensations or different ways of being in that nature?
There were moments, one of the things I love about it is because there's no external stimuli, similar in a way to the darkness, it sends you within. And so there were moments of pure bliss. I mean, tears streaming down my face, connected, paradoxically, even though while I was most alone, connected to my wife back home, connected to humanity, to God, in the most beautiful way. And other moments where I was just in hell, because it was so, and that was one of the reasons why I'm slightly called to go back. It's not only because I actually still haven't gone to the South Pole yet, so I want to go, but on a deeper level, like the spirituality of those experiences. And because it was so hard, I was more consumed with what I call being on the struggle bus. And that was just, your mind's just consumed with the suck, with how hard it is, the physical pain. Whereas there's this fine balance between doing something hard and too hard. And when it's just hard enough, you can kind of get a little bit into flow. There's lots of great books on this, on the psychology of flow. And to get into that flow, it has to be this right balance of hard but not too hard. And to experience that, and I've experienced that on solo training trips because the sled wasn't this heavy or the conditions not that brutal. And there was more moments of this kind of pure bliss. On this trip in Antarctica, I didn't get a lot of it just because it was so hard. There were 4 times on the journey where I skied over 20 kilometers, which was kind of a milestone I need to hit. 20 kilometers is about 13 miles or so. And that night it would snow. And then I knew. I mean, the first time this happened, I did 21.9 kilometers. And then from there, my kilometers dropped to 21.9 to 17 to 14 to 13. And I'm doing the same amount of work, same amount of hours, and my kilometers are just dropping. And it's just soul crushing. It's so hard because you also need to hit the distances in order to have any chance of pulling off this journey. I knew how hard it was. I knew it was on the cusp of impossible, but I still wanted to complete it. I still wanted that victory. I still wanted to complete the crossing. And 4 times I crossed 20. I'd wake up out of my tent and see snow on the ground. And I'm just sitting there like, and you just know this day is going to suck. It's going to be brutal. I got to go through this. So that in and of itself was its kind of own spiritual experience of mastering presence. You have to be fully in the now. And like I had some good mantras that came from that, recognizing that, okay, live this day as if it's your entire life. There is no tomorrow, there's no yesterday, because even consistency or monotony, it can feel very monotonous. Every day looks the same, you're doing the same damn thing, but monotony cannot exist if there is no yesterday and there's no tomorrow. Same thing with the need for consistency. You know this, you've built a business. Anything to be successful, you have to be consistent. Fitness, business, whatever it may be. But if there is no yesterday, there is no tomorrow, there's no need to be consistent. And so reframing how I even view consistency, there is no tomorrow. There is no yesterday. This day is my entire life. Gun to your head, if I was told you, let's say you're writing a book, could you write just today? Could you write just today? And I guarantee you could. Whatever the thing is you're working on, right? The big barrier for consistency with people is assuming you actually know what you're chasing. So clarity is kind of step one. Assuming you know what you're chasing. If you do, the big barrier is the realization that I'll have to do the same damn thing tomorrow, or shit, I just did this yesterday, right? And that's what it becomes overwhelming to think about it. But if I could just live this day as if it's my entire life, could I do it? Yes, I could.
When you were in Antarctica, what was the toughest moment? Was it something during the trip, or was it when you had to go home?
That actually wasn't the toughest moment when I had to go home, because by then I knew that I could no longer complete the crossing. I knew about day 48 that the amount of time I had left out there, it was physically impossible to hit the daily, I forget what it was, the distances. I mean, you'd have to ski 24 hours a day, to, if not more, to cover the daily distances. But day 50, that was when some of the hardest moments hit. Everything was breaking down. Like I had chest pain, spine pain. I had days out there where I was stumbling and falling over as if I was drunk because I was so delirious. And I was scared I could faint. And if I faint out there completely alone, that's fatal. And so other days where after just 2 steps, it felt like I was sprinting and I couldn't catch my breath. And day 58, I had shooting pain in my gut that was pretty debilitating. And the doctor said, if the gut pain doesn't stop, we're going to come get you now. And it stopped. So I tried moving again on day 60. When it hit again, we called it. I later found out what I got was diverticulitis, which is an infection in the colon that if you don't treat it or you don't rest, it can burst and get septic and kill you. And that's actually what happened to an adventurer 8 years ago. He pushed a little too hard, and diverticulitis, and once it bursts, it's called peritonitis, as I've come to learn, and peritonitis is fatal. And so I literally pushed the body to the brink of death. And I think the mental as well as the physical toll on those last 2 weeks was quite excruciating, because I really wanted to keep moving, and it wasn't just the physical, it was just so mentally and emotionally frustrating. Even especially earlier on when I actually had hope to complete the journey, and you're just trying, you're giving everything you have, and you're not hitting the distances. That was pretty mentally draining and emotionally just like, come on, like what else can I do,
This sled, 420 pounds. There's a physical weight. You carried a sled.
Yeah.
I think most people will say, well, I don't carry a sled of food to last me 100 plus days in Antarctica. Yeah. I carry grief. I carry shame. I carry, supporting my 4 kids and being in a partnership. What would you say to the weight that we carry that isn't seen? And did you carry any weight that wasn't physical? Like, what were the mental, emotional weights you carried through?
I didn't carry any. I processed a lot of my demons, so I didn't carry any of that. Yes, I did have some what I call Antarctic therapy sessions where I'd get like a 1% further improvement on my relationship to my own guilt from the war. There's a certain flavor of that I don't know if will ever go away, and I don't have a problem with that, but I got a little closer to moving beyond that. I'd already processed it a lot. So I got to experience moments where I'd cry thinking about my friends and the war, but not in a way that I was unprocessed, just being with. So, but to your question about the weight we all carry in the human experience, I'd say just like the weight in Antarctica and even my own weight that I've dealt with before emotionally and mentally is fundamentally it's about first accepting, allowing, being with. Awareness and acceptance is the foundation. It's the first section, and even in my book, Fearvana, is if you have grief. Like I went to one personal development seminar, and a gentleman had lost his father, and the person who was leading the seminar was trying to help him get rid of his grief. Why? What are you doing? You lost your father. It's normal to grieve. That to me is it's stemming back from everything we said, the demonization of these so-called negative emotions. If you're going through a hard time because you're a single mom raising 4 kids with 2 jobs, I can't even imagine how much you're struggling with. And it's okay to feel the weight of the struggle, right? Like I think sometimes when even my mom does this, like we have a good life and we'll say, oh, because somebody has it worse, I am not allowed to feel pain. You know, like I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking, former child soldiers, been to war, been to post-conflict zones, seen the darkest corners of hell where people, I got to choose my own suffering in Antarctica. That's a luxury that I'm well aware of. And it was a reminder for me constantly out there that I get to choose my own suffering. But that doesn't mean I deny the suffering that I was also going through, because that's actually not helpful. So a really valuable thing is, all right, I'm allowed to feel pain, fear. And this is coming back to parents doing this with kids. Let your kids feel what they feel. Denying the isness of the experience is going to create more unnecessary suffering. So first accept it, then choose how you can use it as a weapon, if you will, to guide you forward in the now. Because the only value the past serves is to access it as a mental weapon to drive you forward in the now. That's it. It is gone. And this takes training to get there. Because most people, we are going to live our lives as slaves to a past that we didn't even consciously choose. So our past paradigms and mechanisms and belief systems shape entirely who we are and how we operate in the world. But the more you train yourself in presence, as well as choosing from a future goal first, choosing an impossible goal demanded so much of me that, for example, while training for Antarctica, I had an aerobic threshold of 170, which meant I could sustain a heart rate of 170 beats per minute while staying in aerobic state. Aerobic elite endurance athletes have 160. I did 21 Nordic curls and exercised so hard that Men's Health wrote an article about a UFC fighter when he did 2. I met and married my wife, trained and prepared for the expedition, raised $1.1 million. And I'm not saying this to brag. The point that I'm making is by setting an impossible goal, I could achieve all of these things because the circumstances demanded more from me. When I first set the goal to do this Antarctica expedition, I had no idea how to do it. But it demanded more of me, and human beings are creatures of adaptation. This is not just me because I'm special. We can all rise to circumstances that we cannot even fathom that we are capable of with this version of ourselves. So the point is, choose from a reality you want to create first, not based on the past limitations that dictate who you're going to be. When you choose from that, you won't know how to get there, but you will start taking steps. And as you take the next step, it's like driving into fog. You can't see a mile down the road, but you can see 100 feet. And as you get the next 100 feet, you can see the next, and so on and so forth. So choosing from that future first, letting go, and you'll see the distinction with people who operate at a very high level of mastery at anything, whatever the craft, they don't talk about the past at all. Many others are trapped in it. And again, it's not their fault. We all don't know what we don't know. But the key is start noticing, for anybody listening to this, start noticing how much do I live in the past? How much am I constantly talking about the past? How much am I victimized by the past? And then you can train yourself to say, all right, I'm only going to access it when I need it. So now when I'm doing something hard, I'll remind myself, dude, you're a badass. You've done all this stuff before. Can you do this? Like even now when I'm building a business, I have hard moments. I'm like, oh, this sucks. I didn't get the sale I wanted, whatever it may be. And I'm like, dude, you just dragged a 420-pound sled through Antarctica. At least you're comfortable in AC. Stop complaining, you know? And that's my self-dialogue. You don't have to use my words, but the point is you find your own. But that you train yourself to be fully present, aim to a future, and only use the past when you need it.
And I love that you're choosing something at the edge because you don't want to choose something super comfortable. There's no growth. There's no space to build who you are.
Exactly.
So boundaries, I think boundaries are really interesting because boundaries give us an identity. They say what I am and what I'm not. And you've taken yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally and spiritually to some pretty intense boundaries. How has your identity changed? And in this last mission, who are you? Like, who's Akshay now at the edge of this last boundary that you couldn't even complete?
Yeah. The beautiful thing about all these voyages on the edge, they have led me to the realization that the answer to that question, who am I? I am the creator of my own illusion. That's what these voyages on the edge have taught me. And I'll break that down a little bit more.
Please.
So through these experiences, I've come to learn that the entire human experience is this dance of opposites. Pain and pleasure, light and dark, life and death, ego, humility, control, surrender, masculine, feminine, so on and so forth. And very often we demonize one side as bad, right? We think stress is bad, the darkness is bad, pain is bad. And the reality is that these two forces are not in fact opposite. They're two expressions of a greater whole. So just like breathing, inhalation, exhalation, two opposing forces create breath. The heartbeat, expansion, contraction, two opposing forces create life itself. And this comes back to even Fearvana at a meta level. It's this realization of the oneness. So out there on these edges, I can see how, in a very visceral way, I've come to learn how two opposing forces can exist at the same time. For example, when I was in the darkness, the brightest white light I've ever seen was sitting in a dark room. It was so bright that I was covering my eyes. It was blinding me. It was blindingly bright. So what this does is it shatters the illusion of separation. I start to see that how I move through reality is a construct that has been ascribed to me. Even in the simplest way, when I see that white wall, I say that is a white wall. Why is that a white wall? Because at a young age, I was taught that thing that I'm seeing is a wall, and that color is white. Every time we use a word, words are based on a conceptual understanding of reality, which is ultimately a construct because it has been taught to us about how to engage with reality. So these voyages on the edge have revealed the illusory nature of reality and how it is entirely a construct that has been created. So when I first started seeing this, I remember I would drive and I would repeat this to myself. I'm awakened to the truth that all my reality is an illusion. That is a red car. Why is that a red car? Because that's a construct that's been ascribed to me. So I would hone in on this, repeat this until it becomes crystal clear. And then I see if all of how I move through reality is an illusion, I'm going to create the illusion that serves me. And that's the evolution that has happened is that, I mean, even memories, talking about the past, there's a ton of research that has shown this. Our memories are so malleable. There's done studies on people after 9/11. They would ask him one day after 9/11 where they were, what happened, ask him 5 years later, and huge things had changed in their memory, not just small things, but even where they were. And our memories are so malleable. So you realize that almost everything about how we interact with reality is simply a construct. My nationality, like the way I think, our religion, our politics. Most people who operate that way just because they've been taught that that's how to think. So when you become fully aware that it is a construct, you can rise above the construct, question it. And I've actually done this for almost every construct. And then I'll decide because I'll choose the exact opposite of a paradigm that I operate from. So even as another example of this, I remember a few years ago I was out running and I saw a sign that said 5K fun run. And I had conscious disgust, visceral subconscious disgust at the idea of a fun run. You don't run for fun. Everyone has to be an exercise in suffering. Right. And if you're not suffering, you're wrong.
Come suffer with them.
Exactly. Like I had gotten so good at the edge of suffering, but that was an unhealthy way to live.
Right.
So I started playing on the edge of joy. I started doing more fun things, light things, playful things. But now, because I've played on the edge of almost every duality you can think of, and I'm always looking for a duality causing me friction, and I'll go play on the other edge of it. So I'll play on the other edge of it. Now I can make a choice beyond a construct that's been inscribed into me and say, look, I know both sides of that option. Which one am I choosing to operate from? Because I know the positives and the negatives of each side. And, you know, someone like me, I'm always, if you look at the duality of pain and pleasure, I'm always going to be someone who leans a little bit more on the edge of pain. But now I'm doing it consciously because I've played on the other side. I know the value of it. I've experienced the height of opulence to the depths of poverty. Not my own, but seen it, you know, experienced it. Every duality. And so that's the lesson is that look for a duality causing you friction. Go play on the other edge of it. You'll start to see what you don't know. Because as I said earlier, we don't know what we don't know. You start opening doors that you've never opened before. And it also just makes life more flavorful. Like you can't have light without dark. You can't have a summit without a valley, you know? So it just makes life so much more flavorful when you play on every edge. And then it expands you to choose which edge you want to be on, you want to live on. You can choose your own constructs of your identity.
Just in your experience and how you work with people, if you would give them one piece of advice or a strategy or a mantra even, or a book, what would it be to help them learn to move to the edge a little bit more, to learn more about themselves?
I'd say the number one action I would recommend, almost universally this applies, is go be still with yourself.
Go be still, yeah.
I'd say do what that kid did. Lock yourself in a dark closet. You don't have to do an hour. Let's start with 10 minutes. Something that it should make you uncomfortable. But if there's one cure-all, one silver bullet, I would say, For almost everybody in my experience, it is stillness. Whether you're in the depths of hell or playing on the cusp of mastery, like the greatest athlete in your craft, it is a universal solution that you will find a benefit regardless of where you are in life.
All right, here's to stillness. Where can people find you?
Fearvana, the book is on Amazon, Kindle, paperback, Audible, all of that. And Instagram at Fearvana, Fearvana.
Akshay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's such an honor to have you, and I'm humbled by you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you like this episode, share it with a friend. For more conversations filled with awe and wonder, be sure to subscribe to the Vitalist podcasts. Till next time.